He proposed to me to get revenge on my family. My name is Lila Bennett. I'm 25, and if you met me at a party, you probably wouldn't remember me the next day. I'm the girl arranging the candles, checking the seating chart, making sure the champagne actually shows up on time. I'm an event planner, which is kind of ironic when you grow up in a family like mine, because the Bennetts don't just plan events, we script reality, or at least my father does. Richard Bennett runs one of the biggest conglomerates in the city. When people say our name, they lower their voice a little like it might echo. We have buildings with our logo on them, charity galas with our faces on the programs, a perfectly curated image that doesn't crack unless my father says it's allowed. My mother is always there beside him, perfect dress, perfect smile, the professional wife who knows exactly when to laugh and when to say, "We're just so blessed." And then there's Ethan, my older brother, the heir. He's everything my father worships, sharp, ambitious, loud enough to own any room. From the time we were kids, he was in miniature suits while I was in the background holding the coats. People shook his hand and patted my head. "You must be so proud of your brother," they'd say to me. No one ever flipped it around. My job in the family was simple: soften the edges, make us look human, smile at the right cameras, volunteer at the right shelters, show up at daddy's elbow when he needed to prove he wasn't just a shark in an expensive tie. I was the quiet one, the soft-spoken daughter who read too much and talked too little, a prop in our PR strategy disguised as blood. For a long time, I told myself that was enough. That safety meant playing my part. Our world was polished, predictable, controlled. Cold, yes, but safe. At least that's what I thought. Then I met Adrian Coles. He didn't come crashing in like some movie hero. He walked into a boardroom as an investor representative and somehow managed to see me in a room where I was trained to disappear. For the first time in my life, a man looked past my last name and saw an actual person. I didn't know then that the very thing that made him different was also the most dangerous part of him. I didn't know that to Adrian, I wasn't just Lila. I was a weapon with my father's surname stamped across my heart. If you'd told me back then that I was falling in love with someone who'd only ever meant to use me, I would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. I still remember the first time I saw Adrian properly, not just as another tailored suit in one of my father's endless meetings, but as a person. It was a Tuesday morning, which in Bennett world means everyone is already at war by 9 a.m. He walked into our glass conference room like he'd designed the building himself. Tall, calm, dark hair, just messy enough to look intentional. He was there as an investor representative for a partner firm we were courting. My father was in full performance mode, Ethan was interrupting people like it was his job, and I was in my usual place, off to the side with a laptop, quietly adjusting schedules, making sure coffee refills happened before anyone snapped at a waiter. Most people overlook the silent one in the room. Adrian didn't. When Ethan made a joke about Lila's little event projects, Adrian's eyes flicked to me. "You're the one who organized the Aurora launch, right?" he asked. His tone made it sound like it was important. I blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, that was me." "It was flawless," he said, and he meant it. "The flow, the timing, even the way you used the lighting to keep people from bunching near the bar. I've never seen a corporate event actually feel enjoyable." No one in my family had ever complimented my work in that much detail. My father praised outcomes, not effort. Ethan took credit. My mother just said, "You always make things so pretty, dear," like I was arranging flowers instead of coordinating a multi-million-dollar launch. After the meeting, while everyone else was still posturing near the door, Adrian lingered by me. "I'd love to hear more about how you approach these things," he said. "It's impressive." It was such a small thing, but for someone like me who'd spent years being the background, it was like someone turning a light on. He kept showing up after that, sometimes for official reasons, follow-up meetings, dinners with the board, but more and more he'd find excuses. Dropping by the planning office with coffee because I was in the area, asking my opinion on venue options we weren't even using, staying after big events to help stack chairs when he had absolutely no reason to be there. Adrian was everything my world was. My father's warmth was calculated, Adrian's felt effortless. Ethan's confidence was loud and sharp, Adrian's was quiet, the kind that made people lean in. He asked questions about my life that weren't just setups to talk about his. He remembered the answers. My family noticed, of course. In Bennett circles, nothing goes unobserved, but instead of disapproving, they were pleased, flattered. "A Cole interested in our Lila," my mother said one evening, smiling over her wine. "You always did have quiet taste, sweetheart." My father was more direct. "Adrian's smart," he said. "Ambitious, comes from good money, good connections. If he's serious about you, that's promising." In Bennett language, that was practically a blessing and a half. Ethan clapped me on the shoulder once, half teasing. "Didn't think you'd land someone like him," he joked. "Guess there's more to you than charity events and color palettes." Adrian never made me feel like that. When we were alone, at late-night dinners after everyone else had gone home, in quiet corners of crowded parties, he acted like I was the most interesting person in the room. He asked about my favorite books, my least favorite galas, how it felt to always be the quiet one in a family full of volume. He studied every hole in my heart and filled it perfectly, I say now, looking back. I didn't know he'd carved them there himself. At the time, it just felt like a miracle. After years of being seen as a tool, a placeholder, a humanizing ornament, here was someone who praised my ideas without comparing me to my brother, who saw me as something other than a Bennett asset. I didn't know that was exactly what he needed me to believe. If the beginning of us was a slow burn, the middle was fireworks. Adrian didn't just date me, he curated an entire world where it felt like I finally mattered. It started with flowers at my office. Not big, obnoxious arrangements meant to show off, but simple ones, white lilies my favorite, which I'd mentioned once in passing. The card always had some quiet joke or line from a book we'd talked about. My assistant would raise her eyebrows and I'd roll mine, trying not to smile too hard. Then there were the weekend getaways. You need a break from all this, he'd say, waving vaguely at the skyscrapers outside my window. He'd whisk me away to a cabin by the lake or a tiny inn in a coastal town where nobody cared what my last name was. We'd cook badly burned toast, share stories under blankets. He'd listen when I ranted about my father treating me like a PR asset and say things like, "You're more than the role they've written for you, Lila." He had this line he used often, "You're my peace amid chaos." The first time he said it, we were on his balcony, city lights flickering below us. I laughed awkwardly, unsure how to take it. "I mean it," he insisted, brushing hair away from my face. "My world is all deals and power plays. With you it's quiet, real." That sentence became my lifeline. On days when my father tore into Ethan over missed targets, when my mother practiced another fake smile for another photo, I'd replay Adrian's words, "You're my peace." In a life built around everyone else's noise, finally being someone's peace felt like being chosen for something more than optics. My father, of course, did his due diligence. He was skeptical at first, watching Adrian with that calculated gaze he reserved for assets and enemies. But skepticism softened the day Adrian saved a major deal for the company. It was a tense partnership on the verge of collapsing. Numbers weren't adding up, egos were clashing. I remember the fight in the boardroom, voices raised, my father's jaw clenched. Then Adrian stepped in, calmly laid out a new structure, negotiated terms no one else had thought of. By the end of the night, the deal was not only back on, it was better. My father clapped him on the back, genuinely smiling. "You're sharp, Cole," he said. "We need more men like you around here." Later that week, he pulled me aside. "If you're serious about this, man," he said, "I won't stand in your way." In Bennett speak, that was full support. The proposal was like something out of the kind of movies my mother watched when she thought no one was looking. Rooftop dinner at a hotel overlooking the city. String lights, soft music, a private chef. My calendar had client dinner blocked, because apparently his manipulation extended to scheduling too. Halfway through dessert, fireworks exploded over the skyline. I turned to comment on the coincidence and he was already on one knee. Ring box open, eyes soft. My heart hammered so hard I barely heard his rehearsed speech. "Lila Bennett," he ended, voice shaky, "will you marry me?" My throat closed. I thought of every quiet moment, every "you're my peace," every small kindness I'd clung to like proof that I wasn't just a prop in my own life. I nodded, tears spilling, and managed to say yes. Our families celebrated like it was a merger, because in their eyes it was. The perfect power alliance, someone called it at the engagement party. Bennett and Cole. My father looked 10 years younger that night, pride and greed blending in his eyes. I believed, with a kind of desperate relief, that I'd finally stepped out of his control. That marrying Adrian meant I could be part of something built on love instead of manipulation. What I didn't know was that the very deal Adrian had saved, months before, involved the company my father's conglomerate had quietly crushed years ago. Adrian's family's company. My heart wasn't a new beginning for him. It was the Trojan horse he was sending back into the walls of the empire that ruined his life. Engagements are supposed to be this golden in-between, more than dating, less than married, full of champagne and planning boards on Pinterest. Mine started that way. Dresses, venues, endless questions about color schemes and seating charts. My comfort zone, ironic. But underneath the mood boards and tasting menus, something started to itch. Tiny things at first. Adrian taking calls on the balcony and lowering his voice when I came near. Emails I'd catch on his laptop with subject lines like "final phase" before they flicked closed. Work, he'd say easily, kissing my forehead. Boring investor stuff, you'd hate it. Most of the time, he was the same attentive, careful man I'd fallen for. He still brought me coffee, still remembered when I had exhausting meetings and sent dumb memes to make me laugh. But every so often, there'd be this distance. He'd zone out at dinner, fingers drumming on the table like he was counting down to something. When I asked if he was okay, he'd squeeze my hand and say, "Just tired." My instincts whispered that something was off. Growing up around people who lied for a living, about profits, about reputations, about happiness, had given me a weird sixth sense for performance. But I'd also spent my whole life being told I overthought everything. So whenever that unease bubbled up, I smoothed it down with his words. "You're my peace. You're the one real thing." Meanwhile, my father was shifting too. He started involving Adrian's firm more heavily in negotiations tied to our wedding. Sponsorship deals, joint ventures, contracts that seemed oddly timed to our engagement announcements. I'd walk past his office and hear our names in sentences that didn't sound like family talk. One night we hosted a gala, a glittering mess of silk, champagne, and fragile egos. I was in my element, managing chaos with a clipboard and an earpiece, making sure the donors felt important, the photos looked organic, the speeches didn't go overtime. During the event, I slipped into a side corridor to breathe for a second. That's when I heard it. My father's rival, Marcus Hale, was standing with Adrian near the service entrance. They didn't see me. Their voices were low but clear in the echo. "She's the key," Marcus said, clinking ice in his glass. "Once you have her, he'll sign." A chill ran down my spine. Adrian's jaw tightened. "He'll sign because it's the right move," he replied. "The marriage just makes it cleaner." Marcus chuckled. "So Semantics. Either way, Bennett bleeds and we profit. You're playing this well, Cole. Never thought you'd get this close to the throat. My breath caught. I pressed myself against the wall, heart racing. She's not just leverage, Adrian said after a pause. Don't forget that. You're the one who said you were willing to do anything, Marcus replied. Don't grow a conscience now. Footsteps approached and I ducked back into the main hall, the music swallowing the rest of their words. I told myself I'd misheard. That she's the key could mean 1,000 things in business. That my love being used as leverage was too melodramatic even for my family. I walked back into the ballroom, pasted on my practice smile, and let people gush about the Bennett-Cole union while my stomach churned. That night, lying in bed next to Adrian, staring at the ceiling, the sentence replayed in a loop. Once I have her, he'll sign. Everything okay? He murmured, half asleep. Yeah, I whispered, just thinking. He pulled me closer. Don't overthink us, he said softly. We're the one thing that isn't complicated. I wanted to believe him so badly that I filed away the whisper of doubt like I'd misfiled so many other red flags. But deep down, a question had been planted. Was I the love of his life or the most strategic contract he'd ever signed? If you'd taken a photo of my wedding day without sound, it would have looked perfect. The kind of image magazines fight for. Crystal chandeliers, floral arrangements taller than some of the guests, a famous string quartet playing something soft while the city's elite glided into our ballroom. I remember my dress feeling heavier than it should have, like every bead and stitch carried the weight of someone else's expectations. My mother fussed over my veil. You look like a dream, she whispered, her voice bright and brittle. My father kissed my cheek in the hallway before walking me down the aisle, his grip firm. You're making a very smart alliance today, he murmured, romantic right. When the doors opened and I saw Adrian waiting at the end of the aisle, everything else blurred. He looked at me the way every girl is taught to want to be looked at, like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. For a while, that was enough to quiet the unease humming under my skin. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Vows exchanged, rings slipped on, applause, the obligatory kiss. Our families smiled for cameras, reporters whispered about the union of two powerhouses, guests clapped politely and mentally checked whose stock to buy. The reception was a blur of speeches and toasts. Ethan roasted me just enough to seem charming. My father gave a carefully emotional speech about losing a daughter but gaining a son. Adrian thanked everyone, voice steady, hand warm on the small of my back. Halfway through the night, I remember standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching everyone whirl, feeling this weird mix of joy and dread. I'd done it. I'd stepped out of the Bennett box. So why did it still feel like a stage I hadn't built? Then the room shifted. It started with a murmur near the entrance. Then a cluster of people with cameras pushed through the doors, ignoring the staff trying to stop them. Microphones, flashes, that hungry look reporters get when they smell blood. One of them shouted, Richard Bennett, care to comment on the leaked documents? Time slowed, my father's face drained of color. Conversations stuttered and died around us. What documents? He snapped, the charm wiped clean. Another reporter raised a tablet, scrolling. The evidence proving your company's offshore accounts and illegal investments. The statement just released names you directly, from Adrian Cole. Every head in the room turned, toward my father, toward the screens, then toward my husband. My heart stopped. Phones buzzed across the hall as guests checked the news. Breaking banners flashed. Bennett Empire under fire, insider leaks expose massive corruption. Below a quote, provided in partnership with Adrian Cole on behalf of those destroyed by Richard Bennett's actions. My newlywed husband had given a statement during our wedding. I fumbled for my phone, my hands numb. There it was, cruelly clear, his words to the press, talking about justice, about families ruined by Bennett's greed, about no longer staying silent. Adrian, my voice came out small, swallowed by the chaos erupting. But he was gone. At some point between the last toast and the first headline, he'd slipped away. No explanation, no goodbye, just a trail of evidence and a bomb detonating in the center of my family's world. My father swayed, clutching the back of a chair, then collapsed. My mother screamed, a sound ripped from somewhere I'd never heard before. Ethan started shouting at anyone within range, reporters, security, me. Did you know? He roared, grabbing my arm. What did you tell him? I know I didn't. The words tangled in my throat. Cameras flashed, catching my stunned face, my ruined dress, my father being helped up by men who toasted him an hour earlier. The perfect wedding turned into a public execution in real time. And the man I'd just promised my life to, the one who told me I was his piece, he de-orchestrated all of it, and then vanished before I could even ask him why. There's no manual for what to do when your wedding becomes a crime scene and a press conference at the same time. One minute I was Mrs. Adrian Cole, the next I was the Bennett daughter at the center of a scandal. My name splashed under photos I didn't recognize my own face in. In the weeks after, everything blurred into a kind of slow-motion wreck. Our family's empire didn't just wobble, it crumbled. Regulators opened investigations. Partners pulled out. Stock plummeted. Every network replayed the footage from our reception on loop. My father collapsing, my mother's smeared mascara, me standing frozen in white like a ghost. Inside the house, it was worse. Ethan cornered me in the hallway 2 days after the news broke, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and too much rage. Did you feed him information? He demanded. Did you play spy for your little lover? I flinched. No, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, he sneered. You never know anything, Lila. You just let things happen to you. My father refused to see me, literally. I knocked on his study door 3 times in 3 days, and each time my mother appeared instead, blocking the frame. He can't handle looking at you right now, she whispered on the 3rd day. You remind him of all of it. All of what? I shot back. Of what he did or of who exposed him. Her eyes filled with tears. This isn't helping. She didn't answer, but she didn't deny. Outside, strangers had opinions. Comment sections called me complicit at best, a clueless trophy at worst. Talk shows debated whether I'd been in on Adrian's plan or just too stupid to see what was happening. People took selfies outside our gates like we were a tourist attraction. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. I packed a bag, jeans, sweaters, the most practical pieces of my old life, and moved to a tiny apartment under a different name. The deposit came from the one account Adrian hadn't managed to tie up in the legal mess. Even my escape was accidentally funded by him. The silence of that new place was suffocating. No staff, no constant phone calls, no echo of my father's voice barking orders. Just me and 4 blank walls. Every time I shut my eyes, memories played like a cruel montage. Adrian's hand in mine at the altar, his voice saying, "We're the one thing that isn't complicated." The headline with his name under the word source. I replayed every "I love you" he'd ever said. Every kiss, every soft moment. Knowing what I knew now, they sounded like lines from a script he'd rehearsed long before I walked into that boardroom. And yet, and this is the part that makes people judge me, some stubborn, broken part of me still missed him. I hated him. I hated what he'd done, how he'd used me. But in the middle of the night, when the anger burned out and all that was left was ache, I'd remember his laugh, the way he'd look at me when he thought no one else was watching, and wonder if any of it had been real. I didn't want to admit it, but I needed to understand why. Not just the surface level, revenge, answer the media kept screaming. I needed to know what kind of pain twisted a person enough to walk into someone's life with that much precision and leave with that much damage. Part of me prayed I'd never see him again. Another part of me lived at the window, waiting for the knock I swore I'd ignore. Both parts of me were wrong. The knock came on a Tuesday night because apparently my life likes to repeat itself. I was sitting on the old futon I'd bought secondhand, scrolling numb through yet another article dissecting my family's downfall, when someone hit my door 3 times. Firm, familiar. My heart lurched into my throat. I told myself it was a delivery, a neighbor, anyone but him. When I opened the door and saw Adrian standing there, every feeling I'd been juggling for weeks crashed into each other at once. He looked different, not in the obvious ways, same eyes, same jaw, same stupidly perfect posture, but there was a hollowness around the edges now. The confidence he used to wear like a second suit was frayed. "Lila," he said, my name a question, a plea. For a second I couldn't speak, then all the rage I'd been trying to manage snapped back, sharp and clear. "You have 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't slam this door in your face," I said. He swallowed. "Because I owe you the truth, and an apology, and more than that." I let him in, not because he deserved it, but because I couldn't carry another unanswered why around in my chest. We stood there, 2 people who'd been husband and wife for less time than most people's weddings run late, staring at each other like strangers. "I won't waste your time," he started. "You deserve to know everything." "Everything?" I repeated, crossing my arms. "Like how long you were planning to ruin my family, before you shook my father's hand, or before you kissed me the first time." He flinched. "Before both," he said quietly. "Long before." Then it came out, halting at first, then in a rush. Years ago, before I ever knew his name, my father's company had targeted a smaller firm, Cole and Ward, his family's business. They used fraud, legal loopholes, backdoor deals to bleed it dry. When Adrian's father tried to fight back, doors slammed in his face. Courts dragged their feet. Investors vanished. One night he left the office and never came home, Adrian said, voice cracking. They found him in his car. He left a note that said he was freeing us from the shame. My stomach lurched. "I watched my mother lose everything," he continued. "The house, the business, the friends who stopped returning calls once the word corruption got attached to our name. And all the while, Bennett's stock climbed. Your father gave speeches about integrity while my father was in the ground. So he'd built his life around one goal, get close enough to destroy Richard Bennett from the inside. He studied my family like a case file. He knew Ethan was too arrogant, my father too guarded, my mother too removed. And then there was you," he said. His gaze met mine, haunted. "The quiet one, the one they used as decoration but never really saw. I realized you were the way in." My throat burned. "So you targeted me." He didn't deny it at first, yes. "And all that crap about me being your piece?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The flowers, the trips, the I love yous. They started as strategy," he admitted, "but somewhere along the line they stopped being lies." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Convenience." He stepped closer, then seemed to think better of it. "You weren't supposed to matter," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You were supposed to be leverage. A name, a ring, a seat at your father's table. But you did matter, Lila, you do. I didn't plan on loving you, but I did." The words hit like a fresh wound on top of old ones. Part of me wanted to hear them, had been craving some sign that I hadn't been completely delusional. Another part wanted to scream. Do you want points for accidentally growing a heart halfway through your little vendetta? I snapped. Because from where I'm standing, love shouldn't look like detonating someone's entire world on their wedding day. He pressed his hands to his eyes for a second like he was holding himself together. Exposing your father wasn't just revenge, he said. It was justice. He ruined lives, not just mine. Employees, families, people who trusted him. Someone had to stop him. Justice? I repeated, feeling something inside me break in a clean, horrible way. Justice doesn't leave corpses of people who loved you in its path. He flinched. I never meant to hurt you like this. But you did, I said. You walked into my life knowing exactly what you were going to do to my family. You let me fall in love with you anyway. You let me dream about a future with you. And then you pulled the trigger on the day you knew it would cut the deepest. Tears blurred my vision, hot and relentless. You can stand here and tell me my father deserved it. Fine, maybe he did, but what about my mother, my brother, me? We didn't bribe anyone. We didn't sign those papers. He looked at me like I'd just punched him. You're right, he said finally. You didn't, and I don't know how to make that right. You can't, I whispered. That's the point. We stood there in that tiny living room, the air thick with everything we'd been and everything we'd lost. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a hurt, furious man who'd let his pain grow teeth. He was a victim of my father's corruption and the architect of my own personal hell. Victim and villain, and I was the collateral damage both of them left behind. I'm sorry, he said again uselessly. For what? I asked. For destroying my father or for destroying me along the way? He didn't answer. His silence was worse than any justification would have been. When he left, the room felt colder. But for the first time, the story in my head wasn't a loop of how could he. It was a tangled, ugly thing, understanding and fury twisted together. He wanted to break the Bennetts. He had, but he'd also broken himself. And somehow I was the one standing in the ruins, trying to decide which pieces were even worth picking up. Time has a weird way of stretching and collapsing after your life explodes. Days drag when you're lying awake at 3 a.m., replaying every mistake. Months vanish when lawyers and court dates fill the calendar. Eventually, headlines became less dramatic. Bennett scandal turned into Bennett case update and then into smaller blurbs on the financial pages. My father was charged, tried, and sentenced. He started serving time in a facility that looks more like a country club than a prison, but bars are bars even if they're wrapped in marble. I didn't visit. The last time I saw him was in a courtroom, his hair thinner, his arrogance deflated. Our eyes met for a second, and in that brief moment, I realized something terrifying. If Adrian hadn't done what he did, my father would have kept going, ruining people, smiling for cameras, using me as a prop. The truth didn't excuse Adrian, but it made me see my father with a clarity I'd avoided my whole life. So I cut ties. No more Bennett board meetings. No more gala appearances as the good daughter. Legally, I kept the name because changing it felt like letting him erase even that part of my story. Emotionally, I started building a version of Bennett that was mine, not his. I went back to work slowly, carefully, not as an event planner for my father's empire, but on my own. Smaller clients, nonprofits, community centers that couldn't pay much but needed help organizing fundraisers. The irony wasn't lost on me when the first big gig I landed post-scandal was speaking at a conference about crisis management. I stood on a stage in front of people who'd Googled me, who knew exactly which wedding I'd been at the center of, and talked about how narratives can be twisted when power and pain collide. Reporters still asked about Adrian sometimes. Do you hate him? They'd press, eyes bright, hoping for a quote they could turn into a headline. I hate what revenge makes of people, I'd answer. It was the only honest response I had. I couldn't pretend he was a monster with no motive, and I refused to romanticize what he'd done just because some of it had exposed real wrongdoing. In private, I started sharing parts of my story that didn't involve stock prices, about emotional abuse in families like mine, where control hides behind money and good PR, about how easy it is to lose yourself when your value is always measured in usefulness. Strangely, the scandal that had felt like a death sentence became the thing that gave my voice weight. People listened not because I was a Bennett, but because I'd seen both sides of power, wielded by my father, weaponized by Adrian, and now something I was trying to reclaim in a way that didn't crush anyone else. The man who destroyed my name had accidentally given me a reason to rebuild it, not as Richard Bennett's daughter, not as Adrian Cole's betrayed bride, just as Lila standing in the wreckage choosing what comes next. 2 years is enough time for wounds to scab over, if not fully heal. By the time they asked me to organize the charity event, I'd stopped checking the news every morning to see if my last name was trending. The event was for victims displaced by corrupt corporate practices, families whose homes had vanished when companies cut corners or broke laws. The kind of people my father's decisions had hurt, the kind of people Adrian claimed he'd sought justice for. I threw myself into the work. Venue, speakers, donors, press. It was familiar ground, but it felt different doing it for something that actually mattered beyond a glossy photo spread. The night of the event, I stood at the back of the hall as a speaker. A woman whose husband had lost his pension when a company went under told her story. Her voice shook, but she didn't break. I admired that. Then I saw him. He was sitting in the last row, half in shadow. No fanfare, no entourage, just Adrian in a simple suit listening positioning with his hands clasped tightly. For a second, my heart stopped the way it had when I first saw him in that boardroom. Old habits, old reflexes. He didn't approach me right away. He waited until the crowd had thinned, until donors had drifted off to late dinners and volunteers were stacking chairs. I was at the registration table, stacking leftover name tags, when his reflection appeared in the glass door beside me. "Lila," he said softly. I turned. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in the way people do when life has knocked some of the certainty out of them. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice wasn't cold, just tired. "I volunteer with one of the reform groups now," he said. "They had a table. I didn't know you were the planner until I saw your name on the program." "Convenient," I said dryly. A ghost of a smile flickered. "Life's fond of that with us, isn't it?" We stood there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid pressing in. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, again, without press, without drama, no excuses." "What happened to everything you lost being worth it?" I asked. He looked down. "I still believe what your father did was wrong," he said. "I still think he needed to be stopped. But I don't believe the way I did it was right anymore. I thought if I burned down his house, the smoke would cleanse everything. I didn't think about who else was inside." "I was inside," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make sure I never do that to anyone again." He told me he'd stepped down from his firm, that he'd been working with watchdog organizations and legal aid groups, using what he knew to help people fight back without collateral damage. He didn't offer it as redemption, just as context. "I'm glad you exposed what my father did," I said finally. The words tasted strange but true. He needed to be held accountable, but I've built a kind of peace for myself now. I met his eyes. "And it doesn't include you." Something in his face crumpled and then steadied. He nodded slowly. "I figured as much," he said. "You deserve that more than anyone I know." There was a time I would have reached for him there. A time when my heart would have leapt at any chance to rewrite our ending. But standing in that empty hall, I felt done. Sad, yes. Grateful in a twisted way, but done. "Take care of yourself, Adrian," I said. "You too, Lila," he replied. We walked out separate doors. No dramatic last look, no music swelling. Just two people whose lives had exploded at each other's hands, choosing not to let that be the only thing that defined them anymore. Closure without reconciliation. Forgiveness without reunion. It wasn't the kind of ending stories usually give you, but it was real, and it was ours. People like to wrap stories up in neat bows. Good guys, bad guys, lessons stamped clearly at the end. My life didn't get that kind of script. What I got instead was something messier and I think truer. Love and revenge are cousins. They both obsess, both justify extremes, both burn through whatever you put in their path. With Adrian, I experienced both at once. I know now that what I called love in the beginning was half real affection, half my own hunger to be chosen by someone not named Bennett. And what he called justice was half righteous anger, half a refusal to see anyone but my father as real collateral. Love built on lies doesn't just collapse. It caves in and drags everything around it into the hole. When our marriage imploded in front of flashing cameras, it felt like proof that nothing was ever real. But standing on the other side of all that, I can also see the strange, brutal gift in the wreckage, the chance to build something true from what remained. A small part of me will probably always love the man Adrian pretended to be, the one who brought lilies to my office, who listened when I whispered about feeling invisible, who said I was his peace. That version of him fit so perfectly into the empty spaces my family left that it's hard not to grieve losing him, even knowing he was a mask. But I don't crave him anymore. I don't sit by windows waiting for his knock. When his name pops up in an article about corporate reform, my chest tightens then relaxes. He's a chapter, not the book. One morning, a year after I saw him at the charity event, I went back to the rooftop where he'd proposed. It wasn't booked for a grand gesture this time. Just me, a chilly breeze, and a city that had long since moved on to its next scandal. I brought the engagement ring with me. Not the wedding band, I'd left that at the bottom of a drawer, but the ring he'd slipped on my finger under fireworks. I turned it over in my palm, watching the way it caught the light. Such a small thing to have anchored so much. I thought about the girl I'd been that night, eyes shining, heart open, believing she was finally stepping into a life that belonged to her. I wanted to hug her and shake her at the same time. He proposed to destroy my family, I said quietly to the empty air. Instead, he taught me how to live without them. Then I pulled my arm back and scattered the ring, stone, metal, the whole glittering lie out into the wind. It arced once, caught the sunrise, and vanished somewhere between glass and sky. I stood there for a while, watching the city wake up. Cars started moving, windows lit up. People who didn't know my name or my story hurried to jobs that had nothing to do with the Bennetts or the Coles. The world didn't pause for my pain. It never had. But inside, something was quiet, not empty, just still. I was alone, and for the first time, that didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like freedom. I turned away from the edge and walked back toward the stairwell, toward whatever came next. Not as Richard Bennett's compliant daughter. Not as Adrian Cole's collateral damage. Just as Lila, finally fully mine.